Well, hello and welcome to the 2014-15 Audit Trail Map to the Statewide Initiatives. My name is Christy White. I'm the president of Christy White Associates. We're a CPA firm that specializes in school district auditing and consulting, and we travel throughout California to serve our clients. Joining me here is Heather Daud. Heather is one of our shareholders, and she's also an audit principal, and she serves many of our clients. Heather and I have been working hard on understanding the new statewide initiatives and the audit impact on all of you. You know, there's been so many changes between the local control funding formula, Common Core, Prop 39 Clean Energy Act. It seems like information is coming out daily, but we're finally getting some clarity on the audit standards. The CPA community has been meeting with the state departments as well as district representatives. The 2013-14 audit guide just came out, and as well as the draft of the 14-15 audit guide. We're really anticipating that, and that will be made final July 1. So we're here to share with you what's in the audit guide, what you can expect. But Heather, tell me, I mean, you've been out there and you've been traveling around the state working with your audit clients. What are some of the big questions that they have about the audit?
Right, Christy. I've been getting tons of questions on LCAP, Common Core, grade span adjustment, and CalPADS, just to name a few areas.
Right, so have I. So why don't we start with the big one, which is the local control funding formula. The 13-14 audit guide has a pretty simple requirement for the LCFF, and that is that a certification be done by the district superintendent or an administrator or a designee. So, and basically the certification says that they are aware that there is a new funding formula. So, you know, unless they've been living under a rock the past 9 months, I assume most of our clients are going to be well aware of that and have that certification, right?
Right. Sounds pretty simple, but what if the district didn't get it signed? What happens?
True. It does say if for some reason they don't have it signed that there would be an audit finding, but there's no apportionment penalty to it. So the finding would go in the audit report, but simply say that they need to do the certification in the 14-15 year. But let's talk more about the local control funding formula. It does make so many changes to the way apportionments go to school districts, and we do audit the revenue as well. It eliminates PERS reduction. It eliminates the revenue limit altogether. It makes changes in instructional time. For example, in the 2015-16 year, school districts are going to have to go back to that 180-day minimum year. It sets the standard now for the annual instructional minutes to be the statewide average. So no longer if you had that higher 82, 83 base, do you have to maintain that? It eliminates the weighted average calculation for instructional minutes if districts were using that. So a lot of changes. On the revenue side, we're still going to make sure that they are closing their books properly. You know, there's 3 components to the revenue: state aid, property tax, and now the Prop 30 Educational Protection Act funds. Accruals have to be done properly as well. But, you know, the key drivers will be really important as our audit progresses. For example, you know, P2 is still going to be a really important piece of our audit. But the new one, and the one I want to ask you about, is CalPADS, because I know you've been out there auditing CalPADS with some of your clients. So what are the requirements and how is that going?
CalPADS is not only a big part of the apportionment, now it's a really big part of the state audit guide. So we'll be coming out and your auditors will be asking for 2 reports, the 1.17 and the 1.18. And from there, they're going to pull a really large sample to obtain a high level of insurance. And from there, to verify the free and reduced meal students, they're going to have to pull the free and reduced meal applications. And for the English learners, they're going to ask for either or the CELT scores and the home language surveys. So there's going to be a lot of items pulled and a lot of time spent in this area. It's a big part of the audit this year.
Well, and it's the first time this has been audited. So what happens if they have exceptions? What are the auditors going to do in that case?
Well, the audit guide says the auditors can do one of 3 things. They can either, 1, extrapolate the sample to determine the error. 2, in the site that so the school site they find the error in, they can test 100% of that site.
Be a lot.
Right, which would mean pulling 100% of the free and reduced meal applications. Or they can do some additional testing to determine what the error is. And I think the third one is probably what we'd choose to do for the most part.
Right, yeah.
But I mean, that's a big area. But I'm getting a lot more questions right now is on LCAP.
Right. So LCAP, the Local Control and Accountability Plan, has been on the minds of many throughout the state because it's being written right now for the first time. And it's going to be in the audit guide for the 14-15 school year. And the first piece of this will be looking at the whole collaboration process. So, school districts have to involve parent groups. If they have an English language group, they have to involve them. There has to be public hearings held, and then finally the adoption by the school board. So that whole process is going to be subject to audit. The other area is going to be the expenditures.
Right.
So LCFF says right in the Ed Code that there is to be an audit of expenditures to make sure they're consistent with the plan.
Okay.
So the auditors are going to be looking at specific action items, services that are in the plan, and then looking at the expenditures and making sure they're consistent with that plan.
Right. Well, does that mean they're going to have to track all the resources separately?
Well, that's a great question. And the answer is no. LCFF is unrestricted funds, so the Department of Education has really held firm that they are not developing any type of resource code for the expenditures, even for these targeted groups. So basically what the auditors are going to do is we're going to look at the types of services that are being provided in the LCAP and simply see that there are expenditures in the unrestricted side of the district's budget for those types of activities. An example would be if they were hiring a reading specialist or maybe providing more staff development days or even raises. We would look at the expenditures to see that, in fact, those kinds of activities are being paid for. And I know there's been a lot of questions, too, about what dollars go into the LCAP. Should it just be the dollars associated with serving the targeted population, or should it be the entire budget? And so at a recent conference, Department of Ed was there, and they said at a minimum it should be the dollars associated with the targeted group, but it could be as much as the entire budget or anything in between. So that's the audit requirement right now over LCAP.
Okay.
But let's talk about maybe some of the other new statewide initiatives, one of them being Common Core. So do you want to go over Common Core, Heather?
Common Core is an audit area for the 13-14 year, and so we're looking at it right now. So we're looking to make sure that the districts have a discussion at their board meeting that they've adopted a plan for the Common Core funds. And then we're making sure the expenditures are spent accordingly.
Right.
So it's pretty simple.
Well, what happens if they spend the money before they adopt the plan? I've had a couple of questions from districts on that.
And it's a good question. There's nothing in the legislation that states the money has to be spent after they've adopted the plan. The only thing they need to do is make sure that the money is spent in contingent with the plan, the adopted plan. So it's important.
Yeah, another new initiative is Prop 39, which is the Clean Energy Act.
Right.
And I know some districts have already, in fact, many have received planning grant money. So what are they required to do in terms of those expenditures?
So what we're looking for is to make sure that the money that's spent on planning activities is not more than the amount you've been allotted for planning. It's kind of the big area we're testing this year. Not many of the districts have even spent the money on the actual projects at this point. So.
Well, so what if they have carryover? What if they haven't spent the money? Can they carry it over? What if they don't have enough planning activities to even spend the entire grant? Do they have to return it to the state?
Well, no, actually, they can just put it towards the projects. As long as they're approved projects and they're on that list and they're allowable, they can put the money towards that. So it's actually not too difficult.
You know, LCFF is highly unrestricted.
Right.
But there are some exceptions, and those are related to the maintenance of effort requirements for adult education, ROP, transportation, right? Is there going to be any audit around that?
Right. Actually, in the 14th, 15th year, the auditors are going to be asked to determine if any funds were spent in 12-13, and they're going to have to determine that you're spending at least that amount in those areas. So we will be looking at that coming, in the next year. So it's a new area. Not this year, just to clarify, it'll be next year.
For next year. Okay. So they have to spend more than the 12, 13
Exactly.
days.
Exactly. At least that amount.
Right. Exactly.
Or more.
Class size reduction is gone.
Oh, that's right. Oh, yeah. Class size reduction is the next big area. So.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about the grade span adjustment. So no longer do we have K-3 CSR, we have now we have the grade span adjustment. A lot of questions about that.
Right.
It's going to be audited in 14-15, and the requirement is that districts, if they're over 24-1 in grades K through 3, that they have to transition down to 24-1 as they are rolling out the new LCFF funding. 10.4% has been allocated to the base, so it's significant dollars that we're talking about here. So what we will do is we'll be auditing their calculation. We'll talk about the collective bargaining exemption in a minute, but we're going to audit their calculation to see what goal they're to meet in order to make that progress. Department of Ed did come out with regulations, and they did come out with the calculation. We'll look at the underlying data. So, for example, are they using accurate enrollment data as of the last day of each school month through April 15th? Then if they do have that collective bargaining exemption, we're going to read the agreement. And the important thing to know is it cannot be vague.
Right.
We have to know, is there a maximum at both the school site level and at the district-wide level? And if there is, then that would meet the requirement and they would not have to make that progress as long as that collective bargaining clause is in place.
So if the contract states no class size should exceed 25-1, is that okay?
Right, that's a good example. So even though it doesn't state specifically what the maximum is at a school site, the fact that an individual class cannot exceed, say, 25-1, automatically there is a cap at the school site level and at the district level. What we would recommend to all of you is that you run this past your district auditor, who will be looking at it next year, as well as if you need legal counsel to look at that too.
But what if one of the class size fails to meet the requirement?
Well, that's a really good question, because it is all or nothing in terms of the funding. So you're either in compliance or you're not. So all of that funding, that 10.4% of your base grant, could be at risk if you're not in compliance. There could be some appeal mechanisms, but you really don't want to get there. So make sure that you're meeting this requirement.
Wow. Okay. A lot going on in the 14-15 year.
There is. There's one other item, and that is related to the colleges, and it's basically concurrent enrollment. So students could be enrolled in what we call a middle college high school or an early college high school. Now, a middle college high school has a curriculum that's essentially school to work in nature, more vocational in nature, as well as college prep classes. And then the early college high school is kind of a school within a school. It's a program with the universities that allow for the student to earn up to 2 years of college credit while they're in high school. In both of these programs, there needs to be a lot of flexibility in terms of the student's schedule. So they allow that the student have a minimum day that can be as low as 180 minutes. So as auditors, and again, this is next year in 14-15, if there are students who have less than 240 minutes, as low as 180, then we need to just make sure that they are enrolled in those college courses or in those approved vocational training courses.
I see. So it sounds like the sites are going to have to keep a little bit more paperwork on file.
Right. So we will be looking at that. So, well, I mean, there's a lot of information out there, a lot of new requirements.
Right.
And just kind of keeping in mind that these are on top of the requirements that we have been auditing the past few years, including, of course, attendance, the ACES program.
Independent study.
Right. So, so it's important that you keep on top of this to avoid any audit exceptions. We recommend to all of you that you read through the new audit guide, that you discuss it with your auditors, and if any of you have questions of us, feel free to either email or call us or go to our website at christywhite.com. So thank you, Heather, for being here today.
Well, thank you, Christy. It's going to be a really interesting couple years going forward.
Definitely.